What we're going to do today is just outline training for fire or firefighting versus training for law enforcement. While there are a lot of similarities between the two, what I wanted to do is just give a quick breakdown of some things or important things to consider when you're in either of these types of occupations. This is basically going to be a breakdown of a longer form training that I have recorded in another place, but for now, we're just going to break this down as simply as we can. First up, I'm going to break it down into human, okay? So there's certain movements humans need to do, and I break this down simply into 6 categories. So we have push movements, pull movements, we have squat, we have step movements, hinge, I classify trunk into one, and I actually classify jump in another one. Now, humans are meant to do all of these things. Now, if we break it down into police, okay, or law enforcement, so law enforcement officers, let's just kind of quickly outline what a law enforcement officer needs to accomplish, okay? So we'll list out some things that they do. So they spend lots of their day sitting. When they need to move, they need to be, whether they're chasing after a suspect, or they've actually caught the suspect and now they need to employ some type of hand-to-hand combat training. They need to be explosive in their movement. So they spend a lot of times kind of in this sedentary state, whether it's in a car or at a desk, doing paperwork, what have you, but when they need to be super explosive. Calls, now every call is gonna be different, but generally speaking, the situations are gonna be short and intense. I can get into a lot more detail there, but you're gonna spend a lot of hours kind of sitting, waiting, paperwork, sitting in a car, what have you, but when you do need to move, it needs to be explosive and it needs to be short and intense, okay? Another thing that I'll maybe point out, belt or gear. Maybe you're in tactical law enforcement, so you have belt or gear. Often this is lopsided. You're in a patrol car, you might have a belt, maybe it's heavier on one side than it is on the other because that's where your weapons are. So you have this kind of outline of what's expected of you on the job. Now, if we go breaking down the difference into fire, again, I would say in comparison, if you're in the fire hall, everybody's slightly different, but generally speaking, more time on feet. So you spend a lot more time on your feet than, for example, law enforcement would, or somebody at a desk job. Another thing is that when you go to a call, more often than not, the calls are longer duration. So when you get called out, again, every situation is gonna be slightly different, but your time on scene is generally speaking, going to be a little bit longer than that of an LEO. Now, obviously, if we're talking about like a MVC or motor vehicle accident, fire might not be there as long as law enforcement. We're speaking generally here. Let's say you're in a structure fire or even a forest fire. This could be potentially hours. Another kind of thing that you have to consider is heat. And I don't mean heat of just the fire, but heat of maybe your bunker gear, okay? If you're in full gear, that's gonna be a lot hotter, even if you're just kind of like tending at the scene of an accident, you're gonna be facing a lot more heat than maybe some LEO who has just their uniform on. So again, there are many other different types of things that I could go into a lot more detail here, but if we're looking generally speaking, the demands of a firefighter are going to be longer, which means you need more endurance, both muscular endurance and cardiovascular endurance, whereas the needs of an LEO, generally speaking, the demands are gonna be shorter with more intense bursts, and you need to be explosive, and I would even argue both of them need to develop an adequate level or a base level of strength. If I'm working with an individual, it always comes down to an assessment. Assessments are very important. What do they need to achieve? Where are their talents, their strengths, where are their weaknesses, their opportunities to grow? But if I'm breaking down the training differences between the two, there's going to be some overlap, absolutely. But a firefighter, I'm probably going to steer a little bit more endurance type workouts. Whereas a law enforcement, these are gonna be probably much shorter workouts that we're focusing on strength and explosiveness. Does that mean they both exist in a silo? No, I have many clients that actually follow the same program for both. There is a need for law enforcement to have base levels of endurance and fire to have base levels of strength and explosiveness. Again, we need to outline the differences between the two. I'll get into this in another training. If you want to learn more, by all means, you can click the link in my bio. But understand that if you're an LEO, you need to be training explosive and strength-based movements. Okay, if you're not, you're probably missing the mark substantially if all you're doing is endurance. Same goes for fire. If all you're doing is endurance, You're probably missing the mark if you're not training strength, but if you're not training endurance, you definitely need to be working on some functional endurance. You could be at a fire for 6 hours, holding a hose. You'd be surprised at how, if you haven't done that before, at how taxing that can be on your body just from an isometric holding standpoint. So if you're designing the program yourself, make sure you include these movements always, and that you have both endurance and short explosive workouts. But if you're LEO, you want to steer more towards this route. If you're fire, you want to steer more towards that route. And if you need help, whether it's following a base level program, a subscription program, or you can hit me up for individual program design. I can help with that too if you don't want to be writing it yourself. But make sure you include this. If you have any questions, hit me up in the comments below or via email. We'll see you next time.